Okay guys, so now we can move from the M38, we go to the M40. Not a huge difference here, different transmission than the, well, I should go back to that M38, as I said, mentioned, only had 16 ready when World War II broke out, and modifications was made to the M38 called M39, once again based on the L60 tank with some added front armor. And from the M39 we come to this. When this was taken into service in 1942, it was definitely not as advanced as the M38 was when that came out in 38-39. Very similar, you see the 37mm gun, you get the dual machine guns. Once again, enhancement to the front armor on this one, as well as the possibility to add a grenade launcher to support the infantry on the back armor. Those are pretty much your major differences. Okay guys, so development of tanks during World War II was fast. Sweden decided it needed a heavier tank, and this is the result, the M42. It only weighed about 22 tons, so it wasn't really that heavy, but it was the heaviest tank Sweden had during World War II. 282 of these were made, and you might know it under two different names. In Swedish military it was called the M42. It was also called the Landsverk Lago. Landsverk Lago, as I mentioned back, Landsverk is a manufacturer of armored vehicles. They got the job from Hungary to produce a tank for them in 1937, and the Landsverk Lago was this tank and the tank that they developed for Hungary. This was also later the ones that Sweden used, the version Sweden decided to use, and then it was called the M42. It came in 4 different versions. The first one was delivered in 1943 and all the way to 1948. The first version had 2 engines and 1 electromagnetic transmission, which turned out to have quite a lot of problems. So it was upgraded to having 2 engines and 2 hydraulic transmissions, and moving on to having 1 engine, 1 transmission, and the final version 2 engines and 1 joint mechanical transmission. When this was ordered, it was quite a modern tank, but when it was delivered, it was pretty obsolete compared to the competition. The cannon is a 47mm cannon, and it also has in total 3 machine guns, but 2 coaxial machine guns in the turret. Okay guys, so here's a pretty cool tank, I think. This is the Tank 74. And if you think that the chassis looks familiar, it's because this is the M42 chassis. What happened was that Sweden, after World War II, Sweden needed a light tank. And they just bought the Centurion as a main battle tank, and it needed something to complement that. They looked at the French AMX-13 and thought that the protective values of that was a little bit too low. So this is what they decided to work with instead. The gun is a Bofors 7.5 centimeter. It's actually anti-air gun from the beginning. And obviously to be able to fit this long gun into the turret, they had to do a lot of modifications to the chassis as well as development of this turret. Some nice features, this gas ejector here, made sure that it didn't vent the gas, or not too much of the gas into the crew compartment, which is always a good thing, obviously. They had to modify suspension because of the heavy cannon with the gun, wider tracks for instance, because the drawback of the M42 was always the fact that it was a pretty narrow tank and pretty high, which made it kind of hard to steer. So they tried to modify that a little bit. This tank was in service, it came in 2 versions, pretty much the major difference was the transmission. And the first version stayed in service until 1981, and the second version until 1984. And as I mentioned before, a good thing with Sweden, when the tank wasn't used anymore, the turret was attached to fortifications along the coastlines instead. That's recycling for you guys. Quite a beautiful tank, if I may say so. I think now we're getting into a nice design here.